Welcome back to the Marc Clair Show. I've got an incredible conversation for you today. A nearly 2-hour long conversation. And as many of you know, I would usually cut off that last half hour, 45 minutes or so, slap it over behind the paywall in the smoke-filled room. But I really felt this conversation, and you'll find out why, especially as we get towards the end, where some of the most incredible material that you're going to hear comes up. I really wanted to make sure to share this one with everybody. So I'm making this a fully public show. Of course, patrons and supporters of the Marc Clair Show, you can find all those links over at marcclair.com. I give you tons of options. You got Patreon, you got Subscribestar, you got Rockfin. You could even now subscribe on Apple Podcasts directly. You become a member on YouTube. I give you all the options galore, okay? Now, who knows how long my shelf life will be on YouTube. We shall see, but I want to give you as many options as possible because, hey, the more I can do this, the more you can help support me, the more I can continue to grow and expand the kind of conversations that I am delivering to you today in this episode, in this conversation with Jerry Marzinsky. So, no smoke-filled room, but I will be doing a separate bonus content for the premium supporters of the Marc Clair Show. Again, you can find all the links over at marcclair.com. That's marcclair.com. One thing you can do if you are appreciative of this extra length show, of giving you a full length show for the public here, you can check out our sponsors, Fox & Sons Coffee at foxandsons.com, foxnsons.com. You get 18% off your order when you use the MCS discount code. That is just MCS. Very simple. You're going to love the Fox & Sons coffee. Let me tell you, Steven's always getting more fancy exotic beans from around the globe. I don't know how the man does it, but he does it, and he does it well. He's also a great family man, teaching his sons about entrepreneurship with this incredible business. And Steve is a real one. I spent a couple hours on the phone with Steve the other day, and he's a real dude. He supports the show because he loves this show. So if you love this show too, please do consider supporting Steve and Fox. Get yourself a bag or two over at foxandsons.com. And my friends, please do enjoy this incredible conversation, if I do say so myself, with Jerry Marzinsky. Welcome back to the Marc Clair Show. My guest today is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the nation. He is also the co-author of the book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. I'm so pleased to welcome Jerry Marzinsky. Jerry, welcome to my show.
Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here, Jerry. And as we were kind of discussing for a minute before the show, the what you get into and what you've uncovered in your career really does tie into so many of the sort of higher level topics that we get into on this show. But I just want to start kind of learning a little bit more about you. Obviously, there's your own background that you can detail a little bit, but I really want to get to when you first started encountering some of these patients that you'll describe today. When did you first start to realize within your own story there that the medical establishment and what you were learning about mental health, that there was something that was missing?
Well, I think in undergraduate school I started suspecting. So, my upbringing left me with a grave distrust of authority. So that was already programmed in. And what I hated about psychology is that there was no way to, except for experimental psychology, there was no way to test what they were talking about. So here's all these, read this and read that and study this and regurgitate all this, but there was no way to find out for yourself. You couldn't go into a mental hospital or mental health center, or there's no way to test it out. You just had to believe what they were telling you and memorize and spit it back out. That didn't go over well with me. I mean, even though I did it, I didn't much like it. So the first inkling I got, so not only did I not trust authority, but I thought that colleges were the last trustful authority there was.
I'm curious too, since you kind of mentioned it, what was there in your upbringing that sort of already primed you with that distrust of authority?
Oh, well, my dad breaking virtually every promise he made to me. Then there was a big one where I was going for the star rank in Boy Scouts, and it was hard.
I'm an Eagle Scout myself. I know all about it.
So back then we had to memorize the whole Morse code. I don't know if you had to do that.
I got a Morse code badge. I do think I did have to do that for the test. Yeah, for that badge.
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't give us a badge. It was just you had to do it.
Okay.
Just for no badge.
The badge.
And so, I did that. I jumped all the hoops for the star thing. And then I, turned it all into the Scoutmaster. And I said, okay, here, I'm done all these requirements. And he said, well, no, you're not. I had a talk with your dad. And he says, you're not religious enough. You're not going to church. And
Wow.
he was hypocritical because he hardly went himself.
Mm-hmm.
So the Scoutmaster said, well, you need to go to church. And I said, for how long?
When does the box get checked? 4 weeks?
Yeah. There's got to be a
Right.
limit to this.
Right. Not for the rest of my life, certainly.
So he said 6 months. All right. So I went for 6 months. I went religiously for 6 months, and didn't really learn anything much. I learned the preacher was having an affair with one of the parishioners. So learned that.
I suppose that's a lesson of its own that might have put more fuel on the fire of that general sense you were getting, that I can't always trust the people to be saying what they say is true.
Right. So that just reinforced it.
Okay.
And so I did my 6 months. I turned it in, and he called the preacher, and the preacher said, yeah, he was here, but he certainly wasn't setting the woods on fire. My deal was I would show up.
You never said I had to be into it.
Yeah, right. So I did my part of the deal. And he says, well, no, I'm not going to give it to you. Wow. The preacher said you weren't really into it. I said, that wasn't part of the deal. The deal was that I would show up, and I showed up. He said, well, I'm not going to give you the badge. And I said, well, I quit. Take your
I can't believe they gave you that much of a hard time over just star rank even. I mean, an Eagle, we got a pretty good grilling, and maybe even Life before that to get really into the nerdy weeds here. But I think that was a breeze for most of us.
Yeah, I felt the same way. So he gave it to me probably 20 years later. He finally broke down, and it ended up in the mail one day. It was like, all right, so you did realize you were wrong, didn't you?
Well, that's good that he sort of had his moment.
It was after all that time, because right. I kept in touch with him. He was a decent guy. Then the next big one was going into college. I thought, well, these guys are almost gods. That's the impression I got from my father when he was going to school, and. I remember a day in psychology class, we were taking abnormal psychology, and the professor said he wanted us to read this article by a clinical psychologist who wrote this paper saying that if two psychotic patients met each other and they both had the same name, one of them would have to switch his identity. And I'm thinking, even as an undergraduate, I'm going, what sense does that make? They're both crazy. Why would one of them have to, change his name? I mean, if you ran into another person named Marc Claire, you wouldn't change your name into, something else.
Right. I think it was an odd coincidence, but I probably wouldn't change my name.
Right. So I was thinking that doesn't make any sense. But there was no way to check anything out. There was no way to get into a clinical setting. Matter of fact, I never saw a researcher in the 40 years I was working on the front lines in mental health in all these different settings. I never saw a researcher on the front lines. They were all writing out of the big pharma controlled universities, saying what big pharma and the psychiatric mafia wanted them to say. They weren't investigating the front lines. Mm-hmm. So fast forward about 4, 5, 6, so maybe 8 years. I'd already graduated from the master's program, and I was doing rounds on the second floor of a big psychiatric unit at Central State Hospital. This place was massive. It was the size of a small city. It was the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet at the time. There were 10,000 patients there when I got there. And that was down from about 21 a few years before that. So it was a small city that had its own food factory, its own central kitchen, its own heating facilities. I mean, it was like a small town in and of itself. And So I was doing the rounds on this psychiatric unit, and I saw a new patient, and he was talking, it looked like to himself, but he was carrying on a coherent conversation. And it sounded like one part of a telephone conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And what they taught us in college was that the voices were hallucinations. And I'm thinking, well, if they're hallucinations, they're like word salad. They don't make any sense. They're just garbage, nonsensical words. That's not what I was hearing. From a number of them, they were arguing with these voices. They were talking with these voices. There was one lady that she was arguing with the voices as she was leaving the hospital. So she was arguing with the voices that she didn't want to leave the hospital as she was leaving the hospital grounds. So the voices weren't what I thought they were. I mean, these were coherent conversations that these people were carrying on. So I heard this guy talking. I kind of snuck up behind him and wanted to kind of hear what he was talking to with these voices. But he caught me, before I could pick up anything. And he turns around and I said, well, hey, I haven't seen you here before. My name's Jerry. I'm the psych on this unit. What's your name? And he looks at me in the eye and he says, well, I'm Jesus Christ. And, I think back to that abnormal class and I look at him in the eye and I say, no, you're not Jesus Christ because I am. And I'm like sitting there wondering like, okay, what's he going to do? Is he going to change his name like this clinical psychologist said he was? Is he going to change into somebody else? And I'm sitting there waiting and he cocks his eyes up and he's thinking like, and then he looks at me and he goes, okay, we can both do Jesus Christ. And he kind of strolls off. And I went, okay, what else?
That's not what they said he'd do in the book. They said he couldn't have the same name. It's already falling apart.
Yeah. So that was another, it's like, okay, what else did they lie to me about?
Mm-hmm.
So the second thing I thought, so I was already wary. Now, what struck me as really strange is this was a massive hospital. And I was very interested in abnormal psychology. And there was every psychopathology in that place that you could imagine. They were all there somewhere. You could see them all. And I was like a kid in the candy store. And I was also an adrenaline junkie. Yeah, that helped a lot. So
I imagine, there's a lot of adrenaline spiking moments working at a place like that.
Oh, there was. And so what I saw was that nobody in that entire hospital that I was around was the least bit interested in what those voices were telling these patients. And after several months, it was clear to me that those voices were somehow affecting their behavior in a negative way. I didn't know how, but you could see it. They listen to the voices and they start acting up. They start doing stupid stuff. They start doing destructive and crazy stuff. And the medicines were being given to them to suppress the voices. Right? That was one of the purposes. So,
what are the medicines that they were prescribing these patients, by the way?
Phenothiazines. They were back then. It was Thorazine and Mellaril.
Are those still used today?
Yeah, Thorazine's pretty rough. It's pretty crude. Mellaril, I think, is still used. There was another one called started with an S. Stelazine. And, so they're still used, but they all had fairly nasty side effects. So what the psychiatric mafia and big pharma are doing is producing these same kinds of meds that are still serving as major tranquilizers, but with less severe side effects. They still rot the patient's brain out with long-term use. They're still awful meds, but nobody was interested in what these voices were telling these people. The other thing I saw is that I would ask all the psychiatrists I worked around, all the psych nurses, I said, what causes schizophrenia? And, some of the more honest ones would say, we don't know. But I would say 85 to 90% of them would say, well, it's a chemical imbalance of the brain.
It's not really an
This is
answer,
the
though, because what causes that imbalance then?
Well, what struck me is I never watched them, or I never saw them take any kind of baseline. So if you're saying there's a chemical imbalance of the brain, before you start treating it, you would think you'd want to know what chemicals are out of balance. I think, what are there, 23 different neurotransmitters or something like that? Which of them are out of balance and by how much? You'd think that you would want some kind of baseline to start with. So if there's an imbalance, what's out of balance and how much, and what do you give to fix it? That never happened. They would just reach into their bag of medicines and go, well, I think I'll start with this one. And if that one didn't work, it would be another one. If that one didn't work, we'd change it to another one. And they only spent like 15 minutes a month with these guys. Ask them, how your medicine's doing? Well, I don't like them. Okay, we'll change it to another one, see if you like that any better. They never took any baseline ever. And I'm like, well, how do you know what's out of balance or how much? I asked one. They said, oh, we don't worry about it. The drug companies take care of that. I'm like, what do you mean the drug companies?
Oh, they've already done the
that?
research, so we're fine.
That's right. They've already done the research. Wow. And it blew my mind. I'm like, what? That's like letting the fox loose in the hen house.
Did you find you were the only person asking these kinds of questions around there?
I was the only person, only one. And I got in trouble for it.
Just for asking the questions?
Just for asking the questions. When I started, see, the staff didn't know what the voices were. They didn't much care. They weren't curious about it. They were told that they were hallucinations, and that's what they believed. But they weren't the least bit curious about them or what they were saying or how they behaved or what they were doing. They weren't asking any questions. They were just dishing out medicine. They had been brainwashed in the institutions to believe they were hallucinations, and that's what they believed. So none of them knew what the voices were other than hallucinations or how they operated or what they were saying to these people. So I started asking the schizophrenics themselves. And it took about a year to figure out how to do that, because they don't call them paranoid schizophrenics for nothing. They're paranoid, and they got good reason, because there is no positive outcome to answering questions about the voices. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but the voices themselves punished the person for talking about them. The other thing is they've lost all their friends. When they start talking about these voices to their friends go, you're weird. Something's wrong with you. You're possessed, or something's wrong with you. You're off. And they lose their friends. So they start telling their parents, well, I'm hearing these ugly voices. And their parents get all upset, and, they see they're behaving strangely, and they take them to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist pronounces them mentally ill and puts them on these awful medications that make them feel awful. So there is no positive outcome.
And they don't stop the voices either.
No, they will quiet them, but they won't stop them. And the voices are horrible. They're like, they say things like, you're no good, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're ridiculous, nobody loves you. The most vile things that you can imagine. That's what these voices are telling these patients.
Is that consistent across all schizophrenics? Is it always negative?
Well, the paranoid schizophrenics.
Okay, that's a specific subsect of schizophrenia.
That's a significant they're the biggest group. And that's not only significant for the state hospital I worked at. When I went to work in the psychology of the state prison here in Arizona, it was the same thing, same patterns, same exact patterns. It was like they were all made from some cosmic cookie cutter, or all programmed by some cosmic cookie cutter somewhere to say the same kind of stuff. You're ugly, you're stupid, you're rotten, nobody loves you, you're weak, you're every rotten thing you can think of. And so it was the same there. It was the same here. And now that I've got my own private practice, I'm working with people all over the world. It's the same for everybody. People in France, Germany, England, Peru, all over the Western world. They're saying the same things. in that particular language, but it's all the same stuff. And there's 23, I found 23 different patterns that they run. Okay? Bottom line is, if they're running patterns, they're not hallucinations. Hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. Some are positive, some are negative, they're all over the place. The first pattern I noticed was that these voices were all consistently negative. Mm-hmm. All of them. And if they weren't, it was only to get the patient's trust, and then they'd hit them later behind the back. So they were derogatory. They were consistently negative. They were insulting. They were abusive. They were destructive. The question was, why weren't they random? If the psychiatric mafia is saying that they are hallucinations, why aren't they random like hallucinations? Second question is, what is holding them on that negative path? Why aren't they random? Why aren't they meandering all over the place? Why are they just consistently negative all the time? What holds them negative? It reminded me of that movie, The Enemy Below, where there was a destroyer chasing a German U-boat. And every time the destroyer captain lost that U-boat would turn onto a certain course. And when the captain lost him, he would turn back onto that course and stay on that course until he caught up with him again. Same thing with these things. They're on a certain negative course and they stay on that course, and something is holding them on that negative course. So that came from asking questions to the schizophrenics at the state hospital about these voices. So I was slowly getting information from them, and they were very distrustful of psych staff, because basically our job was to, if they went off their meds and they were starting to act crazy, our job was to turn them into psychiatry, and psychiatry would drug them again. So we weren't the highest trusted among them either. And they would lie to the psychiatrists about the voices. After they saw how bad the medicines were, the psychiatrist would ask them, "Do you still hearing voices?" And they go, "Oh, no, I'm not hearing voices anymore.
All gone, thanks. You can check me out."
They're all gone. Yes, yep, I'm
good
fine.
To go, thanks.
Yep, good to go. Exactly. That was exactly what happened. And then they're still hearing them, but they're not going to tell psychiatry.
Voices or not, that's probably what I would say too, because I imagine no matter what, I'd want to get the hell out of that place.
Yeah. And those medicines are awful. They're terrible.
Today's episode is sponsored by Fox & Sons Coffee. And let me just tell you, Steven of Fox & Sons, he is not just an advertiser. He has been a supporter of this show from day one, and frankly, since before day one, because he came over with me from the old Lions and Liberty days. So true fan of the show. He started this company, Fox & Sons, out of his love for coffee and really out of wanting to further bond with his sons and spend time with him, just like he shared time with his father drinking coffee. He also gets to teach his sons about entrepreneurship and business through this endeavor. So I'm so happy to have Steven and really his whole family, the Fox and the Sons, the whole gang, as supporters and sponsors of this show. Not only that, his beans are so high quality, fresh. Look, I just got 2 new bags right here. I got the Mexican and my favorite, the Den Blend Dark. The beans are super high quality, fresh and sourced from small organic farms, fair trade, none of this GMO garbage. They're all small batch roasted. This is high quality stuff. Subscriptions are by far the best way to get your coffee. I have a couple subscriptions going, but that is the way to go. You never run out that way. I never run out. I always have my supply of Fox & Sons. So I want you to head over to foxandsons.com, put in your order today. They ship fast. They ship now through the end of February. Also, by the way, you're going to get free shipping on any order over $37.99. By the way, while you're there, use discount code MCS to get 18% off any order over $25. Stephen Fox is a great man, a great friend, great supporter of the show. I encourage you to check out his coffee over at foxandsons.com.
In the process of asking these questions, one of the schizophrenics got upset. He didn't like me asking the questions, or more likely, the voices didn't like me asking those questions. So he went to the psychiatrist and he said, "Hey, this guy's asking me questions I don't like. It's upsetting me. He's asking me about the voices." Next thing I knew, I was up on the red carpet in the psychiatrist's office, door closed. being given the third degree and being told you will not ask these patients questions about their voices. They are hallucinations, and when you're asking questions about the hallucinations, you're reinforcing them. You're making the patient worse. I knew
feels
that
like
was a
the
bunch
scene
of crap.
from a movie where you're the investigator and you've realized that the organization itself is in on it in some way. Now I don't know if that means they know what the voices really are that you would get into, but they're certainly not interested in you finding out what they are.
Yeah, that was for sure. That happened twice. Okay, and one of the reasons for that was, and this was strange, when I first got to that large state hospital, I noticed that psychiatrists were being beat up at a rate much higher than any of the other staff. Psychiatrists were being assaulted at a rate as high, or almost as high, as the attendant staff that are working with these psychotic patients 24 hours a day. And they were only spending like 15, 20 minutes a month with them. So my dilemma was, what are they saying to these patients in 20 minutes a month that is getting them beat up? It made no sense to me, but it just kept happening over and over and over again. Back then we didn't have any cell phones. We just had these, button dial-up kind of phones where you push the buttons and it would dial. So the grapevine was in the hospital cafeteria, because this hospital was in the middle of nowhere. We had to drive 30 miles into Macon, Georgia, just to get a hamburger. There was nothing there except for the hospital food. So everybody met and ate lunch together. And that's where we learned what was happening on the different psychiatric units. All the staff would meet together. And here was assault after assault after assault on psychiatrists. And it made no sense to me. And it didn't make any sense for 7 years. At the end of 7 years, there was this one gal, she was in cosmetology class. I'm fast forwarding past a lot of other stuff here. And what we did is, the only thing we had back then was the medications. That's the only treatment they had. Counseling these schizophrenic patients was like shooting a rhino in the butt with a BB rifle. It didn't have any effect whatsoever. None. It was a waste of breath. So most counselors didn't really spend a lot of time with the schizophrenics. So the only thing that they really had for them were these medicines. And the patients didn't like those medicines. And they would always go off them. Eventually they would go off them, and then they would get crazy again. And that made no sense to me. It's like the medicines were the only things that were keeping them sane, and they were quitting them. Why were they doing that? Were they quitting them to go insane again? Did they like being insane? Because this happened to almost all of them. They would hit a certain point and they would go, okay, I'm quitting the meds. And then they'd go off them. And I'd get a call from one of the vocational instructors. Hey, Sammy's going nuts here in the auto shop. You need to come over here and get him and put him back on his meds. It's like, so it happened so frequently. I'm like, what is going on here? So I started this listing of, I got off the trail of my original story.
Well, that's all right. There's no defined trail here. We can go wherever
Okay.
it goes.
Well, I'll see if I can remember to get back to it. So I started asking these guys, like, these medicines are the only thing that keep you functional. They're the only thing that allow you to read and study and not act like a lunatic. Why are you going off them? The consistent answer was the side effects. The side effects are horrible. Okay. But the effects of being psychotic are very horrible. They're really bad. You have monsters chasing you, people that, you're paranoid. Somebody's coming through the window to kill you. You're being watched, cameras in the room, demons attacking you. All these horrible things that schizophrenics experience when they become floored. It's, so it's like, well, that's not making any sense. So I went to the DSM and I got a listing of all the facets of paranoid schizophrenia. The hallucinations, the paranoia, all the rotten things that happen to schizophrenics. And After every single one quit their medications and they put them back on medications, I'd bring them into my office and I'd say, "Why'd you quit your meds? Do you like being crazy? What's going on? Why did you do that?" And they go, "Well, the side effects were awful." Okay, granted. Okay, the side effects are awful. I said, "What's worst? The side effects or being schizophrenic?" So I gave them 2 sheets of paper. I'd give them one and I'd tell them, "Write down all the horrible side effects of your medicine," because they all didn't have the same rotten side effects. So they'd finish that and they'd have 5 or 6 awful side effects. And then I'd give them the description of what it's like to be a paranoid schizophrenic. The hallucinations, the paranoia, the confusion, the demons attacking, stuff coming out of the walls. I mean, all that kind of stuff. And I'd give them that, a check sheet, and I'd say, check all these symptoms you've had when you were completely psychotic. And they'd check off a whole bunch of these things, and then I'd hand them both back to them, and I'd say, which is worse? Consistently, they would say that the symptoms of psychosis were much worse than the side effects from the medicines. And then I'd ask them, "Well, then why'd you go off the meds?" And their answer was, "I don't know." That went on for years.
And this is consistent across many different patients with the same answer.
Many different patients in different units, and it was completely consistent. So I had no idea why that was happening, and they couldn't tell me. They didn't know. That was the answer to every single one of them. I felt like a crazy guy myself asking them the same question.
You got to be asking yourself, are these guys having secret meetings and coordinating their answers? I mean, it's got to be driving you mad, like you said.
Oh, it was frustrating. And I go, "Well, then why'd you go off your meds? If the symptoms of psychosis are much worse than the side effects, then why'd you do it?" "I don't know. I don't know why I did it." All of them. It was like some science fiction something. It was like Outer Limits time.
Right, right.
Do. I don't know. Something took me over. I don't know. So fast forward another 7 years. It was the last year I was working at the hospital, and here's this one gal I had in a cosmetology class. She was doing good. She would have made a good cosmetologist. She'd already gone off her meds 2 times. If they went off them 3 times, we just assumed that they weren't going to stay on them when they left the hospital, and that we were wasting our training money on people who weren't going to stay on the meds, which is the only thing they had at the time. Okay. So we would usually discharge them. Say, "Okay, go home to your family. You can't stay on your meds.
Off you go, I guess, right?
Off you go.
There's no other option, huh?
There's no other option. We'll say, we'll find another one who will stay on the meds.
Hope those voices get nicer, I guess. See ya.
Yeah. So when we told her mother, when she told her mother called me and was just begging me, like, please don't do that. Please don't send her back here. I can't deal with her. She does well when she's on her meds. She's doing well in her classes. Let me come up and we'll talk to her together and find out why she, went off her meds. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have an ally to help me ask her why she went off her meds. So the first time I had an ally. So the mother showed up on Friday afternoon, and we're in my office, and the mother and I are both asking her, "Why did you go off your meds?" "Well, I didn't like the side effects." Well, I gave her the side effects and just said something, what's worse, the side effects or the psychosis? She goes, "Well, the psychosis is worse." "Well, then why did you go off your meds?" And her mother and I are both sitting there waiting for an answer. Finally, she says, "You won't believe me." I said, "Try me. I've heard some pretty weird stuff since I've been here. I don't think you're going to upset me with anything." And she says, "The voices told me that I was being poisoned and that the psychiatrist was poisoning me. And the voices were pointing to the side effects of the medications and telling me that I was being poisoned by the psychiatrist." So I went off the meds.
That's why when they broke it down themselves, they would go, "Well, yes, obviously the psychosis is worse." But when the answer actually came, it's the voice telling them they're being poisoned. That is what would come through and put them off the meds.
Yeah, and I think I have a transcript where somebody else was saying the same thing. I'll have to find. I got two fairly short transcripts here, but let me move down the little line before I get that, and I can read those.
Yeah, we can get to those later for sure.
So then it clicked into place. It's like that's why the psychiatrists are getting the crap kicked out of and nobody else is. Mm-hmm. They're the ones dishing out these medications. And the voices are telling all these other ones, yeah, you're being poisoned too. I've heard that over and over and over again. The psychiatrist is poisoning me.
It's so interesting that in this sea of madness in these hospitals that you're in, that you're actually finding, finally, it seems like something logical in a way. Even if you can't explain it, there is like a logical, okay, they are attacking the psychiatrist for a reason connected to what these voices are telling them. But most of the real doctors, quote unquote real doctors there, would say, well, you don't listen to the voices because the voices aren't real, so we don't have to worry about what they're actually saying.
Oh, they're very real. Mm-hmm. they're very real. Just because the psychiatrist isn't hearing them doesn't mean they don't exist. Mm-hmm. And they run the same patterns again. So that explained why psychiatrists were getting beat up, only spending 20 minutes a month with these people. Then it made sense. It took 7 years to come to that conclusion. And since then, I've heard scores of other patients tell me the same thing. The voices are telling them they're being poisoned by the psychiatrist. So the negativity was the first pattern I saw. The second pattern I saw was that the voices were anti-religious. They didn't like these patients reading the Bible. They didn't like them going to church. They didn't like them reading any kind of spiritual material. And what I noticed is when the chaplain gave like an ice cream social in the big meeting room downstairs in the psych center, the schizophrenics would never go. They all sat on the dingy ward, laid in bed, reading murder mysteries or something like that. And the first time I saw that, I said, that's odd. All the schizophrenics on my caseload are all in bed. They're not down during, eating the cake and ice cream. And that was hard to come by.
Yeah. I imagine.
So the first time I just noticed it. The second time it happened, it got my curiosity and I started asking them questions. How come you're not down there with the other patients, eating cake and ice cream and dancing and attending the little brouhaha that the chaplain is running down there? Oh, we don't like chaplains. There is no God. I don't want to go to church. I don't want to listen to that dribble. They were totally anti-religious. So that got my attention. And I saw that some patients were persisting in reading their Bibles, and I got curious. I would ask them, I said, well, how do your voices react when you read the Bible? They said they got louder. They didn't like it. And then that was consistent also. And another strange incident there is that the voices, if the patient insisted on reading the Bible, if they would not quit, because they knew something was wrong, and they were turning to the Bible for answers to help fight whatever this awful thing was.
Because they're not getting them from the doctors and the psychiatrists, certainly.
That's right. So they're turning to religion. And, and if they insisted on reading the Bible, the voices would tell them, okay, if you're going to read the Bible, you need to read it from cover to cover. You can't just start where you want to. And the patient would go, okay, fine. So they'd start reading it from cover to cover. And then they would get to the part of the Bible where this guy begat that guy, who begat that guy. And it just goes on for 30 pages of who begot who for, forever, just boring. Yeah. And the voices would jump in there and then, why are you reading this crap? Jesus couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to save you?
They want to stop you from getting into the good stuff. Like just start with the boring, the weird, dry. Here's all the people that lived for these amount of times, and then they'll never get further.
That's right. And
Kind of ingenious in a way. Yeah.
In a way, diabolical.
I've actually noticed, I have tried to start reading. This is interesting. I mean, I tried to start reading the Bible a few times, and I kind of always get stuck in that same part. And then I've decided, you know what? Maybe I'll just like open it sometimes and check it out. And that seems like a more fulfilling method, actually. So it's interesting that the demons would also, or the entities, we haven't unveiled them yet.
They knew it
on the same path. Yeah.
Yeah, they knew it. So I'm like, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? Why would a hallucination care? So I started asking these some of the other schizophrenics who went to church. Every schizophrenic I found who went to church or had gone to church, I'd start asking them, and I was always bashing these guys with questions, but I had to be careful. So this is before I got caught. These first three patterns, the negativity, the anti-religious. So I started asking them, what do your voices do when you go to church? How do they react? And it broke down into three different categories. If the voices were very weak, they would just shut up. They wouldn't do anything. If the voices were of moderate strength, as soon as the preacher started talking, they would start over-talking him. Like, oh, listen to this garbage this guy's saying, and why are you listening to this crap? Just mocking the preacher and just distracting the patient so they couldn't hear anything the preacher was saying. Okay? So voices were very strong. The patient would jump up and run out of the church like he was being driven out. So it broke up into those three categories. So it was like, why would a hallucination care about religion? That doesn't make any sense. So I started asking more questions, and eventually one patient came and said, when the voices come, I repeat the 23rd Psalm. The voices absolutely hate it. He said it's like throwing worms on a hot frying pan. That's how they react to the 23rd Psalm. And I went, well, that's interesting. Why would that happen? So I started handing out the 23rd Psalm to all these other patients, said, read this when the voices come. Tell me what happens. And it was a similar reaction. There was a very volatile reaction on the part of the voices. They hated it. And again, I'm asking, like, why would that happen? Why would a hallucination care? So something wasn't quite right with what I'd been taught. Third one is that they foster and create negative emotion. So they're constantly trying to get the patient into a state of a negative emotional state of anger, anxiety, paranoia, shame, and guilt. Constantly badgering them. You remember when you did this thing? You remember when you said this? And just kind of throwing it up to them over and over again, like rubbing it into their face, some of the bad stuff they'd done. And then what I found is once they succeeded at that, their energy level dropped, and they could feel that energy level drop. So that I found that interesting. That there was an associated energy drop when the voices showed up, after they left.
So when you say like these, the stronger these entities get, or the voices get, or the more influence they exert on the patient or the victim or whatever you want to call them, the more physical, actual energy that the patient would lose.
Yes, and they didn't have to be actually doing anything to lose it. When I was working in the prison, I remember one fella. He was so drained he couldn't even get up in the morning to eat breakfast. And all he was doing was tossing and turning in his bed all night. So that was a consistent thing also. And so what I did was there was like I came up with 1 to 10 scales. And I would give these to all the schizophrenics that I was working with. I said, how much energy did you have on the 1 to 10 scale before the voices attacked you? And how much energy did you have after the voices attacked you? So it would be like, before the voices attacked, it would be like, 6 or 7, 8, maybe. And then after the voices attacked, it would be down to 3, 2, or 1. And it was consistent. So I think at one point we ran an analysis of variance on it, and that was statistically significant. So here's another pattern showing up. Right. And once again, if the voices are running patterns, they can't be hallucinations, as the psychiatric mafia and big pharma insist. And they haven't ever studied the voices. They haven't done a single study on the voices.
And yet they have the perfect pills for them somehow.
They have the perfect pills for them, and it's like, it reminds me of the old ancient Egyptians that just go, hey, we hereby declare that the voices are hallucinations because we said so. Mm-hmm. And we're the doctors, and we got the PhD, and we got the medical degree, and we're the psychiatrists. So we're in the know. We're the experts.
We've got the lab. We've got the white coat. So what more do you need to know? We got the white coat,
right? And we got the diploma. So you better listen to us. Mm-hmm. And here's all this stuff just not making sense. Over and over and over. It was like, it ended up being like some 23 patterns, I believe it was. And I can go through them quickly. So what we have here is the operational definition of what these voices are, how they manifest in physical reality. Okay? So they're energetic entities, but the only way you know what they are and how they operate is the effect they have on physical reality. Okay? That you can observe. It's almost like a magnetic field. Okay, you get a big magnet with a magnetic field. You can't see that magnetic field. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. You can't touch it. For all practical purposes, for the human being, with all your senses, it doesn't exist. You can't see it. You can't sense it. You get a bottle of iron filings and you put it on that magnetic field, and now you can see the magnetic field take shape. Mm-hmm. That's the same thing with these patterns. And what psychiatry is doing is they're dealing with a energetic entity, an energetic illness, and with a physical drug. So it's almost akin to taking a bottle of Thorazine and pouring on a magnetic field and expecting that magnetic field to disappear. If you put enough of that crap on the magnetic field, it's going to distort it, but it's not going to get rid of it. And that's what they're doing. So what Big Pharma did is they started out blaming, so they never knew what caused schizophrenia. So they had to come up with something so they didn't look like a bunch of dummies. So first, back in the day, 50s or something like that, they were blaming mothers. Oh, the mothers did something. The mothers said something. The mothers, the mothers are like, wait a minute, we didn't do anything. We're just being mothers. I mean, and there were some good ones and there were some bad ones, but there were schizophrenics with good mothers. I mean, you could see it. There wasn't nothing there. Anybody could observe it. So what they had to do was kick it upstairs. So they kicked it up into genetics, saying, well, there's a schizophrenic gene. It's the genes that cause schizophrenia. And they got away with that for a decade or so. Yeah. Well, and then the biogeneticist saying, we don't see any schizophrenic gene. There isn't any schizophrenic gene. So here comes Big Pharma and the psychiatric mafia going, well, it's not just one gene. It's a mixture of thousands of genes that they interact and and we'll never figure it out, but it's the gene somehow. And the biochemists are saying, yeah, we're not seeing any. So it was debunked. So they had to come up with another way to kind of throw people off and make people believe that they knew what was going on when they really didn't know what was going on. So that's when they came up with this biochemical imbalance. And that was came up by Eli Lilly, a drug company who completely made it up back when Prozac came out.
So they see this problem that exists out there. They see that there's a lot of these, paranoid schizophrenics, and they say, well, no one really knows what causes this, but we can certainly tell them we have the solution and just start essentially manufacturing these pills.
Well, yeah, we know what it is. And since the pills do quiet down the voices and these people do seem to regain some semblance of sanity, what we do works. So we're the one. We're it. We're the ones.
So do you have any thoughts about how the pills, you say they quiet the voices, but they obviously don't turn them off entirely because the voices are still able to say, don't take the pills, you're being poisoned. So what do you have any thoughts about how the pills quiet the voices but don't quite shut them off?
Well, they're major tranquilizers.
Okay, so they're going to quiet everything going on in your
body.
Yeah,
they're going to, they drug the brain.
Mm-hmm.
You don't stop thinking when you take these things. You're still thinking, but you're not thinking as fast or as furiously. Gotcha. And these voices, they put thoughts into your thought stream. Okay? They're feeding it. And they're feeding it in order to upset you, to make you paranoid, to make you anxious, to make you jittery and jumpy. And they want that negative emotional energy. That's what they feed off of. They're parasites. So back to Eli Lilly with the Prozac thing. Here's an article. It says it was not until late 1980s, after the release of the landmark antidepressant Prozac, that the idea of the chemical imbalance hit the psychiatric mainstream. As the psychiatrist Peter Brigham, 1991, points out in his book Toxic Psychiatry, the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme for their new drug Prozac. There was, of course, no demonstrable evidence showing that depressed patients had any imbalance, but Lilly ran with it. Before long, psychiatrists and psychiatric patients alike came to identify with the idea that mental disorders are caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. It was a complete lie, a complete fabrication. And this is what they're basing all their drugs on, is a lie. This chemical imbalance has never been there. There just came out with another article showing that there is no serotonin. So what the psychiatric mafia and big pharma were saying is that serotonin is out of balance. So they created these antidepressants that block the reuptake of serotonin. So once the serotonin is used, the body will destroy it. So it blocked that destructive process so the serotonin would keep activating the neurons. It didn't much work. Okay. And it's been proven that there is no serotonin lack in depressed people. So all this is duplistic. It's all made up. Along with their DSM, that was all made up also. Their Bible. So here's more and more duplistic stuff coming up that made no sense. But these patterns continued. So as I went from the state hospital, where I had to be real careful about not upsetting these patients, because you had two things going on: is that psychiatrists were being beat up at a horrendous rate. So the unwritten rule in the psych hospital was you don't upset psychotics because you don't know what they're going to do. They seem to be going off on psychiatrists for little or nothing. So psychiatrists don't want you doing anything to upset them. So that's where I kind of got in trouble there. So where was I going with that? Oh yeah, so I had to be careful questioning them in the state hospital. When I got to the state prison in the psychology department of the state prison, that was no longer a factor. If one of the schizophrenic patients I was working with went to the warden and said, "Hey, the psych is asking me all these questions and I don't like it. He's upsetting me," the warden would say, "Get out of my face, man. Go play in the traffic. Go pick up cigarette butts off the yard. Get out of my face." So the prison was set up to deal with violent patients. So they weren't worried about it. So what I had around me then was a body of maybe 10 or 12 psychotic patients who I made a deal with to tell me in real time what their voices were telling them when we were in session together. So the deal was, I'll help you out as much as I can, but the deal is you tell me what the voices are telling you.
So you're sort of getting on their side and being like, kind of letting them in on the fact that like you kind of know this isn't correct the way it's being approached. Maybe not so on the nose, but you're kind of making a informal agreement. Like, look, I'm going to try to help you out here, but I got to know more about what these voices are actually telling you.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of so. It was like they were curious.
It's like a movie plot, Jerry.
It was, and they were curious about what the voices were too. They didn't know what they were. A lot of them, and they would ask the voices. They'd ask them, "Who are you? What are you?" And the voices would say, "We are you." If they believed that, then they became the voices, because the voices were running their minds at that point. So there was always a battle with the person between the voices, because they could sense that those voices weren't who they were.
And is that meant to get the person to sort of acquiesce and maybe eventually think, oh, well, these voices are just me, so I'll just sort of give in and then maybe be more under control of the entities?
Yeah. Well, they were, a lot of them didn't know. They thought they were them.
Right.
They thought, because we're all taught from the time we're little kids, every thought that comes into your head belongs to you.
You're so brilliant, little Johnny. You had that thought. I mean, yeah, we all think it's our own.
Yeah. It's like you all think it's your own. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what we're brought up with. That's far from the truth. Mm-hmm. And the voices take full advantage of that. It's like, oh yeah, that thought's yours. Go smack that guy in the face, or go steal some cigarettes, or, and it's thing by thing by thing. Keep in mind, what the voices want is conflict. They want anxiety. They want paranoia. They want all those negative emotions that they feed off of. So they will tell the victim to go do things that will generate that negative emotion, and then they will energetically drain the victim. So, go rob the store, go to the bar and pick up prostitutes. I mean, stuff like that.
Are the entities trying to intentionally get them in trouble and get them into into a jail or into an institution? Is that part of why they send them down that path? Yeah,
because the prison and jails are completely negative places.
Oh, they're gonna have so many friends around. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, it's a very paranoid, very anxiety provoking place to be. You don't want to go to a prison or jail.
It's like a resort for the entities then.
Oh yeah, it's
all my coolest friends are all here.
Right, and you can feel it when you walk in there. I mean, every time I'd walk in that gate to the front gate to the prison, it was like, oh, you could just feel it. They want those people in prison, and they don't want them getting out. So here they take these. They've closed down all the state hospitals, virtually all of them, which kept these people semi-sane at a cost much less than prison does. They dumped them out into the streets. They had no way to work. They couldn't work. They were too messed up. So they'd start selling drugs and using drugs and stealing stuff and get themselves in prison. So now you have the same schizophrenics that were being taken care of in the state hospitals at a much less cost, now in a prison situation where they have to pay for guards and sensing devices and barbed wire and fences and all this security. It's much more expensive. So these are the same guys. Now they're in prison. So they keep them in prison for years. They're psychotic. They're being beat up. They're being taught to be better criminals. They're getting angrier and more violent and volatile all the time. And then when their time is up, then they let them out. Give them $50, get a taxi cab, be on your way.
Do they stay on meds in prison, or are they just...
Well, what they did is they don't like giving them because they cost so much. So what I saw was unless the patient caused problems for them, they didn't give them any medications.
Right. So if he's just in the corner talking to his voices, he's all right.
Yeah, he's fine. But if he's screaming and yelling and causing all kinds of problems, then they get voices, get the medicines. But even then, I remember a situation where the chief psychologist was in cahoots with one of the psychiatrists, and they were on psychiatrists constantly not to dish out so many meds because it was costing them a fortune. And the psychiatrists who practice psychiatry as you would in the community, they were under constant attack for giving out too much medication. So this chief psychologist, he put one of his stooges in the medical unit to, when we would send psychotic patients there and saying, hey, they're heating up, they need to be medicated, this psychiatrist or psychologist, he would say, well, they're not psychotic, they're personality disorders, and he'd send them back. Okay. So I had this one psychotic patient, prisoner. He was getting more and more amped up. He was getting more and more psychotic. He was threatening this other patient, this other prisoner, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. And he was going to attack this guy eventually. So I sent him to the medical unit the first time. This stooge sent him back. I sent him a second time with more documentation as to how psychotic this guy was getting, the threats he was making, that he was imminently dangerous and that he needed to be medicated. They sent him back again saying, oh, he's a personality disorder. I sent him back a third time with even more documentation saying, this guy's going to hurt somebody. You need to do something, with all the pages of write-up and pages of documentation. They sent him back a third time. And 2 weeks later, he stabbed somebody 21 times. I was so furious with the chief psychologist that I couldn't go to work for 2 days because I was afraid I'd punch his face. I was afraid I'd beat the crap out of him. I had to stay out of work for 2 days. I was just absolutely furious.
I can imagine. I mean, and you're literally sitting there saying, look, I literally knew exactly what was going to happen here, but they're not concerned about that, clearly.
No, he was saving money for the system. He was being a good old boy. They didn't care about the prisoner being stabbed. So these patterns kept going, from, I spent 18 years in the state prison and then 10 years working crisis in hospital emergency rooms. So between them, these patterns they kept growing. So just briefly, I'm going to go through them. The voices get louder after sunset. They get loudest between 3 and 4 in the morning. That's odd.
That is a really interesting one.
Why would a hallucination do that?
Hour.
Yeah. The voices get louder when ignored. So I don't know how many times I've heard psychiatrists go, well, they're just hallucinations, just ignore them. Now I'd pull the patient in and say, well, how'd that go for you? They go, didn't work at all. They got louder consistently. This happened every time they tried to ignore them. They got louder. Why would a hallucination do that? They constantly fostered self-destructive behavior. They fostered isolation. They didn't want these people being sociable. They wanted them staying in their cells by themselves. In the mental health centers, they were staying in their bedrooms, listening to their voices and playing acid rock. That's what the voices want. They don't want them associated
acid rock. Do they request that specific?
Well, it's that kind of stuff. That kind of rap, kind of that nasty stuff.
Negative stuff. More
negative stuff. They loved it. They're feeding off it. So they foster isolation. Now, as we go through these, you look at these. This is the same garbage that's coming out of the mainstream media right now. The same garbage that came out of them during the COVID.
Yeah.
It's the same entities on a macroscopic scale, the same patterns. Look at this. You can't ignore them. They're coming over the television. They're coming over the radio. They're coming over the internet. They're broadcasting. I just heard Soros bought 21 radio stations right before the election. So they're just screaming. They foster self-destructive behavior. Look at COVID. Look at what happened there. Look at the lies. Look at the blocking of the ivermectin. They foster isolation. Don't go visit your friends. Don't go out to visit your family for Thanksgiving. Stay home. Lock yourself in the house. Watch the fleas on the wall.
They would tell you to stick your kid in a room for 5 days if he's sick, and leave some soup at the door or something. Which we get sick in this house when we say that we interact as we normally would, because that's just nonsense to me.
Yeah, so they demand the victim's attention. What they're doing with the television right now. They maneuver for increased control over the victim. The voices do that with psychotics. The deep state is doing that with society. they gaslight. So the voices gaslight these things. They manipulate perception. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. So in the lower band of frequencies, they can go into the schizophrenic's mind. They can pull up every rotten thing they've ever done and throw it in their faces until they get them upset. And they just remunerate over that stuff over and over and over again. They've brought up stuff with some patients that the patient had done 20 years ago and long forgot about. And they'd bring that up and throw it in his face.
So they have access to the inpatients and essentially their entire memories, I guess, once they're in there.
The lower realm of their memory. Not the higher realm, but the lower.
What does
realm,
that mean exactly?
The lower frequency things. So the bad things they've done.
Okay.
That kind of stuff. They demand that the victim not tell anybody about their presence. Okay, so the voices don't want the patient telling anybody about them being there. And the mainstream media doesn't want anybody knowing what's really going on and all the crap going on behind the scenes. It's all the same stuff.
It's just a hallucination. It's just a TV show. It's you could really make this comparison across the board.
Yeah, and then you look at all this stuff coming out now that they've lied about, that they've kept down. I mean, that's the other thing. The voices are consummate liars. They lie about everything. So does the mainstream media. I mean, it's the same entity. The psychotic voices are the same entities that's coming out of the mainstream media right now in the deep state. They constantly steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy. They don't want them feeling good. They can manipulate feeling without speaking. They short-circuit reason. They pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim. They foster selective forgetting. They fill the victim's mind with negative thoughts about themselves or others consistently. So Sherry Sweeney, the co-author of our book, she said that every negative thought that comes into your mind is coming in from them. It's coming in from the dark side. They destroy any sense of positive self-concept. They're averse to almost anything positive. Okay? Those are the main ones. There's some more, but anybody who's working with schizophrenics, anybody who's living with one, they can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, go to the articles section and pull up this list of patterns, and you will see them for yourself. They'll be right in front of your eyes. And again, if the voices are running patterns, then they're not hallucinations. Something else is going on. But yet the psychiatric mafia and big pharma are going, oh, hey, all you plebes out there, just believe us. These are hallucinations. Just take our medicines, and we're making $14.7 billion a year selling antipsychotic medicines. You just believe us. That's how much they're making. Something like $14 billion selling these antipsychotic medications. And these things shrink the patient's brain. So they've been doing autopsies on these state mentally ill patients that when they die, they do an autopsy, they see their brains are shrunk like walnuts from these drugs that they're taking, from these antipsychotic drugs. So when the researchers found that, and they printed this, somehow they got it past the universities, because the big pharma pretty much determines what the universities are going to print. You print something we don't like, man, we're going to take away your grants. We're not going to fund your journals anymore, and we're not going to give grants to your students. They control the purse strings. So when that was first discovered, of course, the big pharma and the psychiatric mafia are jumping up going, oh, it's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia doing this. Schizophrenia is causing their brains to rot out. And the researchers went, well, okay, we'll see. So they started feeding these same antipsychotic drugs to mice and rats and monkeys, and the same thing happened.
Oh, the mice had schizophrenia too, I guess.
So these are dangerous drugs. They they destroy the person's neurological system with long-term use. They rot out their peripheral system. They rot out their brain.
Which I have to imagine, if they're dealing with entities that in the long term, even if they can quiet them temporarily, if these drugs are shrinking their brain and it's making them even more susceptible, I would think, to these entities if they have less cognitive power of their own.
I would think so. And take a look at the psychiatrists who are running our mental health systems. The suicide rate, you might think that the suicide rate of subpopulation says something about their mental health. Okay. So, 4.9% of people with schizophrenia die by suicide. So their suicide rate is 5 to 10 times higher than the general population. Okay. Now, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association, the suicide rate for psychiatrists is 65 out of 100,000, or 5.9 times that of the general population. So here, the high priest of mental health in this country are killing themselves at about the same rate as the most disturbed part of our population, the schizophrenics.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, if the class that's supposed to be fixing the problems is as just as affected by them, maybe that's an indicator of something.
Well, they're killing themselves at a higher rate than the general population.
Higher rate.
So the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry in August of 1980 did a 5-year study of 18,730 consecutive physician deaths by suicide and found that psychiatrists suicide regularly, year by year, at rates more than twice those expected, and these differences were statistically significant. These are the high priests that run our mental health system in the whole Western world, not just in the U.S. And you look at the assault rate on them. The assault rate for all jobs, based on a study of 120,000 assaults from 1987 to 1992, over those 5 years, the assault rate for all jobs was 12.6 per thousand. The assault rate for regular doctors, other than psychiatrists, was 16.2 per thousand. The assault rate for custody staff who are working around psychiatric patients 24 hours a day was 69 per thousand. The assault rate for psychiatrists, for the little bit of time they spend around these patients, and in the state institutions and in private institutions, they might spend 20 minutes a week at the most. In the state institutions, maybe 20 minutes a month. Very little time. So the assault rate on psychiatrists for the little time they spend around their patients was 65 per thousand, or 5.9 times higher than that of the general population.
Wow.
That's where the voices come in. Mm-hmm. They're being assaulted at a rate higher, or as high as the medical staff that are working around these patients 24 hours a day. So I think they're a little bit afraid of the voices. Tell you the truth. They don't want to.
I'm curious if you ever, obviously you've identified these as being entities of their own. And I think it's really important for us to get into maybe your thoughts on what makes people susceptible to these entities in the first place. You even said earlier, and this is the idea that all the negative thoughts that come into our mind are, they're not our own. They're from other similar type of entities trying to affect us and influence us. But for the most part, or at least a seemingly decent, large enough part of the population can hear these negative thoughts. I mean, and a lot of these conversations, I've had similar dialogues with more religious figures and stuff that are described in pretty much a similar way, that they're sort of like the arrows of demons. They'll fire them off and see what they can catch with their negative thoughts. But so what do you think differentiates someone that I can recall times in my life when I've been just driving my car and for no reason that makes any sense to me, not suicidal, never was, a thought would enter my head like, what if I just drove off this bridge? Didn't do it. Didn't even think about actually doing it. It's just more like a thought that passed through my mind. And I would just think, why would I even think that? I don't want to do that.
And it was so bizarre that you go, well, where'd that come from? Because it didn't belong to you.
Right.
It didn't belong to your normal thought pattern. That's them putting that thought into your mind. Mm-hmm. So they hit all of us. They don't just hit schizophrenics. They hit us all. Mm-hmm. Every time something like that happens, that's them putting that thought into your mind. And even though you didn't act on it, it was still upsetting. It's like, well, why would I even think something like that?
Yeah, it's a weird thing. It made me think, like, what's wrong with me? Why would I even think? What the hell?
Yeah,
why would I think
right.
about myself?
And they're feeding off of that.
Wow. And so what do you think makes the patients that end up in where you would see them, that get all the way to the hospital, that are the most extreme cases, that are the most afflicted by these entities, what do you think makes someone more susceptible to that? Did you find any commonalities? Obviously, one is going to be drugs. We know that the drugs, whether they're people doing it on purpose, which many people in psychedelic circles will intentionally try to communicate with entities that they think are good or helpful. Others are probably just trying to get high and not realizing what they're opening themselves up to.
Well, yeah, that's one of them. Is playing with Ouija boards. I've seen a lot of people go psychotic on Ouija boards and stay that way.
Wow.
They're dangerous. They're not toys.
And these things are literally just, I don't know if I think Toys R Us is out of business, but you get the point. They're up there in the toy stores right next to Monopoly and Parcheesi and everything else.
No, that's bad news. Yeah, it's bad news. Like I said, I've seen a lot of people go psychotic on those, where they start moving around and they start talking, with the Ouija boards, and then the voice moves into their heads. So you got that going on, and then you got the other drugs, but the most dangerous of all those drugs, as far as going psychotic, is amphetamine. Mm. I have seen more people go psychotic on amphetamine than any other drug. It starts off where they're getting their high, they feel like Superman, they're feeling really good, and it goes on for a long period of time, and they just keep upping the dose, and they're feeling really great, and then they crash, and then they do it all over again, and then along comes these voices while they're high. It starts telling them you're rotten, you're no good, da-da-da-da. And they go, well, that's just a hallucination,
I'm just a meth head. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm just a meth head. It's a hallucination. It'll go away. And they come down and it does. And it may go away the next 20 times. But maybe the 21st time, it doesn't. And it's there for the rest of their lives. Even if they stop
the drugs.
Even if they stop the drugs. It's there. The prison is full of them. Wow. It's full of them. Meth is a very dangerous drug. The prisoners called it the devil's drug.
That's pretty on the nose. This is a much better anti-drug ad than any of those ones that Nancy Reagan was showing me in the 80s. That's for sure.
Yeah, so meth and there are the ones that they're doing the psychedelic thing, and they're looking for a guru or a special spirit to speak to them. They don't know who they're speaking with, and that thing gets in their head and it won't come out. So you got to be careful. Don't assume that whoever you're channeling is a good spirit, because generally the bad ones try to get your confidence first.
Right. I've heard of people that had. Like, actually, somebody commented on an interview I did a few months ago where he said, I started talking to someone an entity that would start telling me, he actually got me off drugs and alcohol, and then I realized that it just made me even more egotistical and led me down this darker path into the occult and doing all this other stuff, because I thought, oh, this thing helped me out, I can listen to it, and then it would send him down this darker path when he finally realized, like, oh yeah, so even the good thing, which ostensibly getting off drugs or whatever is a good thing, but it can also just be a way to build the trust to lead you into the darker thing.
Yeah, so that's pretty common. And then I think one of the biggest ones is trauma. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And psychiatry and psychology don't have any decent treatment for trauma and depression. What they're doing is they're drugging the brain. That doesn't cure anything. And these regular psychotherapies, they don't work worth a darn either. You just bring up the trauma and you rehash it over and over and over, and it gets worse each time. So until just recently, there was nothing out there that would deal effectively with trauma. And then along comes John Mace in Australia, who's a ship captain. He's not a psychiatrist. He's not a psychologist. He's a ship captain. He's driving these big freighters back and forth across the ocean. But he was intensely interested in how the mind worked. So he read all these psychology stuff. He read all this philosophy stuff. He was widely read. I guess he had a lot of time going back and forth across the ocean to read. And he was intensely interested in how the mind worked. And he found that the mind didn't work like you would think it would. He said the mind, all it does is take pictures of where you put your attention. And it can turn emotions, it can turn concepts, it can turn thoughts and ideas into pictures. And once that picture is formulated, then the emotional charge associated with it can then be discharged. So he was able to discharge traumas to the point where after you went through this MACE method, you would remember the trauma, but it would be like no big deal. Okay, I remember it. That's it. There's no emotional affect to it. Okay? It works better than anything I've ever seen. So there's not a lot of MACE practitioners out there right now. But for those of you who don't want to take these toxic psychiatric medicines, okay, go to causisminstitute.com and you can read about this new therapy and you can find yourself a practitioner. This stuff really works, and it's a lot cheaper than these psychiatric drugs that poison your brain and your body and don't work in the long run.
And that method is specifically to heal trauma. So, is trauma just one of several perhaps anchors that these entities can use to sort of latch onto a person?
Yeah, matter of fact, I've heard that they hang around those traumas, and that if anything sets them off, they're sitting there throwing gas on the fire. Okay, so what psychiatry and psychology are doing doesn't work. It doesn't work, and let's take a look at their report card. Okay. In the United States, every year, almost 50,000 people kill themselves. There's more psychiatrists, there's more psychologists, there's more psychiatric drugs on this planet now than have ever existed in the history of mankind. And this is just in the United States. Some other countries are probably worse. Okay? So, suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the United States. The CDC reports that 132 people in the U.S. kill themselves every day. Okay? 50,000 people, that's as many as had died in Vietnam. In the whole war. And this is happening year after year after year after year, with more and more psychiatrists being graduated every year, more and more psychologists, What good are they doing? It's between 2000 and 2018, suicide rates increased 37%. An estimated 24 veterans kill themselves daily in the U.S. From 2006 to 2016, the suicide rate increased 2% a year, with 1.4 million suicide attempts in 2017 and 47,000 deaths. This is the psychiatric report card. This is the report card for psychiatrists and psychologists. I'd give them an F-.
Not the best scores from Professor Jerry, that's for sure, from the psychiatric community. Jerry, there's one more thing I kind of want to dig into a little bit deeper, because we haven't gone too far down the rabbit hole of what these entities really are, and your own sort of revelation of coming to understand not just that they are entities, but what those entities are. And I'm curious, we didn't really get into this at all, so I don't know if you had a religious upbringing of your own before you got into this, or is it these encounters with these entities that put you more like learning more about the religious side of things. So maybe you could just speak on that in whatever way it makes sense.
Yeah, it was a little bit of both, because I told you the Boy Scout story.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
That probably set me back 10 years.
Right.
It was 10 years before I started going to church after that episode.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I believed in God, that there was a God. I wasn't super religious, but I was always reading spiritual stuff. I was always reading, I'd read Carlos Castaneda. I'd read, just all kinds of spiritual stuff, but not necessarily Bible or Christian stuff. And it kind of fed my soul. And then when I started getting into this stuff, it was like, well, okay, if there's this dark side, then there's got to be a good side. I mean, this is a dualistic universe. There's heat, there's cold, there's dark, there's light, there's good, there's bad. I mean, there's all these, opposites. So then I started reading more and more on the spiritual side until I hit a fellow by the name of Emanuel Swedenborg. He was a Christian mystic that lived some 300 years ago.
We can do a multi-hour show on Swedenborg. He's
Swedenborg alone.
Fascinating character. Fascinating.
Yep. So the first time I mean, it was weird because I had a staunch Catholic friend, and I was over his house one day, and here's this book with this drawing of a kind of like a 1700 character with a wig on, the white wigs that they wore. And it says, Emanuel Swedenborg. And I looked at that. It grabbed my attention for some strange reason. And I asked Ken, I said, who's Swedenborg? He goes, you don't know who Swedenborg is? No, never heard of him.
Take a seat.
Well, he said, take that book. So I took it. And I was like, holy cow, look at this. And then when I went and got Heaven and Hell, and I could not put it down. I almost read myself half to death. So then I went to Swedenborg. Now, what Swedenborg, after 50 years of being one of the top scientists of his day, and the chief mining engineer for the Queen of Sweden, making her a fortune, Christ has showed up and told him and said, "Listen, okay, drop all this science stuff. I'm going to give you access to heaven and hell. I want you to go there and you talk to the people in these places and then come back and write about those discussions and teach people on the planet what's going on there." Okay? So I fell into that, and it was incredible stuff. But you were asking about the voices themselves. So I think that might be a good time for us to get into the transcript. So this is an actual session that I was holding with a prisoner who eventually did recover, fully recovered. Okay. That wasn't supposed to happen. I got in trouble at the prison for this.
Oh, we can't have recoveries. We can't sell drugs that way.
No, yeah, but it's like, that's not supposed to happen. So this was a prisoner I was working with for quite a while. And I just kind of randomly went and picked one of these transcripts out. So I don't even know where this was. It was 8/1/2002 where this took place. And it's in the prison. So I'm talking to this guy. And what I was doing was trying to figure out how the voices work, what they do, how they operate, and how I could interfere with them. So I was constantly asking these prisoners, questions. I was bombarding them with questions. I was giving them stuff to do to try and try it for a week and come back and tell me how the voices reacted to this. So it was a perfect experimental situation. It was it's great, and they were coming. Every once in a while, it got a little thick because one of them would come back and say, "Well, this guard disrespected me in front of all these other prisoners. I need to do something about it. You need to beat the crap out of him or stab him or something." And so that it was a little tricky there because if I turned him into security for saying that, and the rest of them found out that I had turned him in, that would be it.
Yeah,
they'd never trust me again. So what I did was increase the number of sessions I had with that guy until he calmed down, or anybody like him. So every once in a while it got a little thick. So here I am talking to this guy in session, and I said, he tells me the voices started coming back once a day now. So we're working on reducing the amount of time that the voices are showing up, doing things that make them not come back as well. He said, I can feel them in the wings. He said, they start off by whispering, "How are you?" And I asked him, "Well, what do you do?" He said, I completely ignore them and start praying. I don't talk to them at all. I generally ignore them. If you give them any recognition at all, then they put their foot in the door. And I asked him, well, how long does it take for them to go away once you start praying and asking for help? He said about 15 minutes. So prayer works if you stay at it. He says, how about the fits they usually throw when you ignore them? Did they go ballistic on you? He said, no. I have to give them the time of day before they can get into throwing their hissy fits. I asked him, do you have a whole lot more peace than before? He said, yes, much more. So he's doing these things that we found that fight back against the voices.
He's saying they too. I'm just curious. Is he saying they in terms of, are there multiple voices?
Yes.
Multiple different, so there's multiple entities at once can be affecting a person.
Yeah, there's several. He's hearing several. And one by one they're dropping out. So I asked him, do you miss the voices? He said, no, not anymore. He said, I used to. They used to be more part of me than I was.
Wow, that's interesting.
And I asked him, I said, are they the same voices you've been hearing all these years? They don't change? He said, nope, they're the same ones. They don't change. Well, how many voices continue to come to visit you now? He says 2. He had 3 before. I said, is that the same number as before or less? He said 1 less. Was the one who disappeared one of the weaker ones? He said, no, it was the strongest one. And I was surprised. I said, really? He goes, yeah. I said, what do you think happened to him? He said, well, I've been praying on a regular basis now. It seems that the strongest one couldn't stand the constant prayer. I said, have you ever forged a better link with the positive spirits? He said, yes, the demons try to disguise themselves as good spirits. What do you do? What do the good spirits do for you? So he said, they help me pray when the bad spirits come. The prayers get louder inside and overcome the bad voices. What kind of things do the good spirits tell you? They tell me to be appreciative of what I have, and I'll get more. They tell me to stay in prayer and to give thanks for what's going on around me. Okay, so that's just a little glimpse.
So because you mentioned there too, like the bad spirits can sometimes disguise themselves as good spirits. So do you think he's describing good spirits disguising themselves as bad spirits, or you think there's actually good spirits as well that do actually come and maybe try to help people sometimes encounter?
I think there are. In his case, well, in one other case, it was the guy's mother. So we were working on. He had a number of bad voices. Matter of fact, it's the second transcripts I have here. If you want me to read it, but. He would hear bad voices, but he would hear his mother. And I was very suspicious. And I said, if the one that seems good tells you one bad thing, that would be it. So he would tell me about his mother coming and helping him. And I'd ask him, what did she say? And it was stuff like, brush your teeth, don't get into fights, don't sell drugs, don't use drugs, stay out of trouble on the prison yard, wash your underwear, stuff mothers would say. Yeah. And that went on for months and months and months. So this voice that his mother was never said anything bad. It just said stuff like the mother would say. Mm-hmm. Okay. So he was working toward getting rid of the voices, and he finally succeeded. Okay. The voices were gone. He didn't have to take the meds anymore. So we finally got rid of them. And at the very end, before I was assigned to another unit, he says, my mother wants to talk to you. And I went, that's strange. His deceased mother wants to talk to me. And I sat back.
I wasn't trying to be a character in this part of the story, but all right, okay.
So I said, well, okay, what she got to say? And she said, thank you for helping my son. And I said, well, you're very welcome. He did a good job. And I went to ask her another question, and she said something to the effect as, I'm not supposed to be talking to you. She said, everything you need to know is in the Bible. And then it turned out that like 2 weeks later, she disappeared, and he never heard from her again.
Interesting.
So it was like she hung around to help him through this.
Had his mother recently passed? Maybe time doesn't matter as much in our human concept of time, but I'm just curious if it was a recent thing.
No, it wasn't recent.
Interesting.
It was a good while back. Now, Now, I also have transcripts from a psychotic killer who's talking about his voices, if you want to hear that.
Well, Jerry, it's not every day someone offers to read me a transcript from a possessed psychotic killer, so I don't think I could turn it down.
Okay, this guy killed 3 people. He killed 2 in a drug deal. He shot them to death. And he murdered his girlfriend and cut her into little pieces, and they still have not found her body. Oh. He almost killed his mother. So his mother was the one who sent me this. And he wrote this, and he goes, it's labeled, "There is a monster." Okay? And he says, "There is a monster that lives in my head. This monster is real. It's not under my bed. My mother tells me things to do." So I'm having a hard time reading it because it's his writing and it's also fading in and out.
Gotcha.
It tells me sometimes when the news is new. My monster is crying as it spent all the years drowning out my courage and disposing my fears. My monster is strong. That's what I like to think. My monster is coming when it's time to drink. So when he drank, the monster got out of control. My monster is ready. My monster is strong. What will I do when my monster is gone? My monster will never leave. That is his plan. It overwhelms me when I'm making a stand. So basically, the monster is fighting through him when he gets into a fight. Mm-hmm. There's a monster inside me. I thought it was strong. How could this be? My monster has a name too. He walks in the dark, whispering, "Yahoo!" My monster is watching me. He won't tell you my name. My monster is the shadows you cannot see. His heart is heavy. He plays for the game. My monster is aware. He wants to be monster. He's as blood from a lake. His bond is with me. Now, monster, he has nothing else to do. My monster awake. This guy killed 3 people.
Or the monster did it through him, depending on
Well, the monster did it through him. So, and a lot of these guys, these serial killers who shoot a bunch of people, they don't even remember doing it.
Oh yeah.
Something takes them over. It's I remember one patient I was working with. The voices told him that to get his gun, get in his car, and drive it till he ran out of gas. Now this is in the emergency room when I was working in the emergency room, and he did that. He ran out of gas. He took his gun, walked out into the desert, sat down, cocked the gun, put it to his head. He was about to fire it when a bird, he said, a strange bird that he'd never seen before, just showed up in a tree near him and just started screaming at him, just raising all kinds of racket. So he took the gun and he took a shot at it, and the blast of the gun going off woke him up. And he looks at the gun in his hand and he goes, "What was I about to do?" So it was like he was hypnotized. And that's the same thing with these serial killers. A lot of times they don't remember doing it. They'll tell the judge, I don't remember doing it, or I didn't do it.
That's interesting. That's the sound of the gun that woke him up, because it's often right after the act of killing that these killers and assassins will, that's when they wake up too. And what happened? What's going on?
Yeah. So it's these voices that are taking them over. Just kind of like MK Ultra, they take over these people they brainwash, and they get them to kill people.
Which makes me wonder: is is MK Ultra creating another personality for someone, or is MK Ultra just letting something in and just maybe directing it a little more with their own arcane knowledge?
Well, they're creating the trauma, okay, and then they program the trauma. So just like these schizophrenics, I mean, virtually all of them were horrendously traumatized at some point. You know, so the CIA and MK Ultra, they just artificially produce that trauma and then program the person to go out and murder somebody. You know, that's where a lot of these shootings are coming from. You know, well, let's take away the guns. Well, we got to get these drones to go out and shoot a bunch of people before we can
take away the Ouija boards. That's what we ought to be banning.
Yeah, take away the Ouija boards.
Keep the guns. You need those, but the Ouija boards, I'm for banning those, I think, at this point. So I guess one thing I want to try to wrap up pretty soon. You've been really generous with your time, but I am kind of curious more like, so have you mentioned this one last person that sort of gotten the voices out. Have you ever seen people that have gone as far? I mean, this doesn't sound that different than a full-on possession in a lot of times, depending on the extreme, the extremism.
Oh yeah, a full-on possession is way different.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I've seen that too.
Okay.
This was working in one of the emergency rooms. There was a guy in California. The parents got a job in Arizona. Okay, this son of theirs was psychotic, and he was living with a girlfriend and trying to maintain. And he couldn't hold a job, and the girl was working, and she was kind of supporting him, and he was getting more and more violent. And what happened is one night she would lock her bedroom door because she was actually afraid of him, and she was going, well, he'll get over this. He's just having a bad time. And then she started realizing, no, he's not going to get over this. And then one day at like 4:00 in the morning, she hears the front door open, and he leaves the apartment with this big butcher knife, and he goes out into the lawn, and he kneels down and he starts stabbing the ground with this big butcher knife over and over and over again. And she can see this in the lights from outside of the apartment. And that really weirded her out. So she called the cops and she said, I don't want this guy here. Take him out. He was beating on the door trying to get in there. She locked him out. She told him the cops were coming, and he ran. Otherwise, he probably would have eventually killed her. But he had nowhere to go. So his parents took him back in. He got a bus and came to Arizona. He's living with his parents. And every time they called him his birth name, what name they really knew him as, he would get furious. And he would say, no, I'm not Jake or whoever it was. I'm Ron. Don't call me Jake. And he would get furious. He goes, I am not your son. And then he started beating up the father when his father called him his real name. So one of the other sons came and beat the crap out of him and threw him in the room. Okay. And he was brought into the ER, and he was virtually completely taken over. He believed he was totally somebody else.
So that's the difference, is that there wouldn't really be voices in a full-on possession like that, because there's only one voice now. It's whatever entity is fully taking that person over. Whereas with the schizophrenia situation, the person is there. Maybe the entities would like to get more control, but there's a battle going on, I guess.
Right. There's a battle going on. There's always a battle going on with the normal schizophrenic.
Or
the ones that are taking over.
You could say there's a battle going on at all times with all of us. Some of us are just, winning it a little better, I guess.
Right. Yeah, we're getting along a little better than they are. But yeah, like you said, they're taking over. They are now the voice. They are now being run by this entity that has taken them over, where the normal schizophrenic is still fighting it. No, I don't want to do that thing, or I'm not going to do that thing. And it's a constant battle. It's a battle for their attention.
A normal schizophrenic, as you sort of refer to them, is still sort of maybe with the right guidance or the right recognition, and maybe that is such a big problem of this, is that you're one of the only people in this field to actually acknowledge that these voices are real, that it's not them that are crazy. They're perhaps being driven crazy by a real voice, but it's not their fault. Whereas so much of the medical industry is basically telling them, it's your fault. You're just nuts. Sorry.
Right. And they so much appreciate that. I mean, I've had one guy write me over email. He said, "Thank you for what you're doing. Now that I know it's not me, I can handle this."
Right.
And
once you realize maybe it's just a voice, like they can't actually make you do these things, it's got to be very empowering. It's got to be, well, screw you, get out of my head. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Because if you think it's you,
right.
then
you can't get him out.
You can't get him out. You can't do anything about it. So what are you going to do to yourself? Because it appears to be you. It appears to be them. It doesn't sound any different than your regular voice. It's not like this voice comes up in your head and goes, "You do this thing." It's not like that. It sounds just like the other thousands of voices that you hear all day long running in your head. And that's not you either. So when you're listening to all this crap running through your head all the time, if you think that's who you are, then ask yourself, who's listening to that? Who's listening to that garbage running through your head? That's the real you, the one who's listening to it. The one who's
thinking, why would I think that? That's the you. The one
that's
I wouldn't drive off the bridge. That's stupid.
Right.
That's me.
Right. That's you. And it's also the one going, why is this thing telling me to do this? I don't want to do this. You're not your thoughts. You're the one who chooses your thoughts. Like the Indians say, you got two wolves on your shoulder. The one you feed the most is the one that's going to grow. You can choose what thoughts you want to put your attention on. When you put your attention on something, you're giving it your energy. So when you put your attention on the thought, you're giving that thought your energy. You're reinforcing that thought. You're feeding that thought. And when the voices are putting negative thoughts in your head and you're paying your attention to them, you're going to eventually turn into those voices. It's strange. It's a strange world.
It's a strange world is a great way to sum up this conversation, Jerry. But I think your work is so important because, like I said, there are certainly a lot of people in the religious world who will certainly have probably over the many years have been. In fact, hundreds of years ago, or thousands of years ago, wherever in there, maybe even tens of thousands of years ago, and even before the Bible, there were probably people that really understood what was going on here. That the idea of a hospital, or this has probably never even come up because we hadn't created these sort of modern institutions yet. It was probably just like, oh yeah, this guy's possessed. He's dealing with some demons. We got to get, he's dealing with spirits, and they would probably do some sort of practice that would certainly be more beneficial than the pills they give them today.
Well, yeah. You look at the Bible. Jesus cast these entities out of people some 23 times in the Bible. And today it's like, the Christians are like throwing them in the back seat. Yeah, there's demons. So you throw them in the back seat. Just don't pay any attention to them. It doesn't work that way. They come up and they bite you in the butt. The biggest deception that the devil has perpetuated on the human race is that he doesn't exist. The voices don't want to be known. They're punished if they're found out. They're punished.
Oh, interesting. You mean punished by higher level entities?
There's levels of these things. There's the plebes, the ones that attack the schizophrenics, the regular voices. Then they have like sergeants and lieutenants. And then they have something very similar to the Nephilim up there kind of ruling the whole kingdom. Okay.
So these are all, I think we can be pretty on the nose about it at this point. You believe these are all the fallen angels of the Bible, essentially, or they're sort of, whatever lower level entities operate underneath them in this hierarchy.
Yeah. And, you look at the Bible, it's these demons were cast down onto the earth. That's where they were put. Man,
couldn't we have put them somewhere else?
So those of you who are more interested in how we came to the conclusion that these voices are energetic entities, you might want to take a look at this. It's how we came there, what the voices were, how they operate, how psychiatry operates, and what a failure they've been.
And the book, for those not watching the video, there's an audio version too. It is An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind. And it's available on Amazon. Is that the best place for people to buy it, or is it better to go through your website? Amazon's the
Well, yeah, you can get it through the website at lulu.com.
Which one gets you more money? That's what I want to know.
Lulu.
right.
Amazon doesn't give us hardly anything.
All right. Well, I'll give, you can all make your decisions out there. Obviously, Amazon's easy for everybody, but if people know that they'd like you to get more of it, they can go to Lulu. And so I'll try to share all those links in the show notes.
Okay. You bet.
Well, Jerry, thank you so much again for your generous time. I think your work is just, it's incredibly important. And I don't know if I wish there was some way to get your work in academic format that your colleagues would actually take a look at. Probably not going to happen. Maybe podcast is the best we're going to do right now, but we'll see. But I really do thank you so much for your time. If you want to run through one more time all the ways people can find your work, your website, and all that stuff, feel free to plug away.
Yeah, they can go to jerrymarzinsky.com. Everything's there. There's scores of videos. And those of you who really want a psychotherapy that works, actually works, go to causizuminstitute.com and find yourself a therapist there. They'll tell you about it. This stuff works. It's not like the psychotherapy where you just repeat the same stuff over and over and over again. And what's interesting about it is the therapist doesn't have to know what the trauma is for it to work. So if you were sexually molested or had something horrible done to you that you don't want to be digging up over and over again, you don't have to. It works anyway. All you have to do is you have to remember, you have to know it. You don't have to tell the therapist what it is.
Interesting.
And it's gone. It's gone in an hour.
And that just takes away one more anchor that one of these entities can use to try to latch on to you.
Exactly.
To try to rub it. So is it that do they take the trauma and just rub it in their face? Is it like, oh,
yes.
Remember? And then once if you're not healed from that trauma, then of course that is so much more effective. So if you can get rid of it on your own, then that makes that the voice so
right.
much less effective.
And what I hear is they hang around in the area of that trauma. And then when something happens in your psychological area that triggers that trauma, say your dad was a real bastard, and somebody appears that's like your dad, this buried stuff that you buried alive starts wanting to break out. So it tells you either attack that guy or you run from him or you avoid him. But in any case, there's a major upset that happens when you run into somebody like that. Causism goes in there and gets that out and releases that energy. So it's no longer there. It no longer exists. And what it feels like after that is, okay, I remember my dad, but there's no charge. There's no emotional charge to it. That's gone.
Gotcha. And if you don't have the emotional charge, then it can't be used against you. So I think that's a great thing to look into. Jerry, thank you so much for your time once again. Check out the website, check out the book. Extremely important work. And I hope to talk to you again soon, Jerry. Take care.
Okay.